back for a new year, 2014. It should be better, you know. I heard a thing on NPR about you know, all the things that happened in 2013. It was really dreary. Sorry, poor Obama.
Don't people say that every year, though?
That's Andrew Anderson. He's our host. I'm the Uber host, and he's the host.
I'm the co-host.
Co-host, thank you. Okay, and Andrew has been with ThinkTech for a long time. He's a financial advisor now, and he's here for a little while from the West Coast, where he will return. And our guest in chief is Evan Weber. He's with U.S. Climate Plan. And if you were watching 6 weeks ago, we had Evan on by Skype, which is a very interesting show. But now, because Evan is a local boy, came back for the holidays, I guess.
Yes.
He's here with us. You know, what's your reaction to the studio, Evan?
It's great, yeah. You know, really, really fancy, lots of big thrills and stuff like that. So, no, it's very good. It's nice to be here.
We have a staff here of about 75 people, from what I understand.
Thanks for mentioning that. If you want to be an intern, come around. We'll take care of you. I also want to mention that after the show, we have some very interesting shows here on a Thursday afternoon. The first business day of the year, we have Carlos Suarez. He does Global Connections. He's going to have Patrick Bronco on. He's a U.S. Foreign Service Officer in Bogota.
Yeah.
Thank you. And after that, we're talking with Marco Mangelsdorf in Shanghai by Skype. He's going to talk about energy in China. That's very interesting also. And finally, at the 4 to 5 block, we're having David Day with Pat Broder. We're going to talk about North Korea's crumbling facade. And that really does ring true. About this time, you would expect Kim Jong-un to start crumbling. It's real, it's real. Anyway, to the show then. Now, these guys have had lunch together, Andrew and Evan, and they have thought up some questions that one of us could pose to Evan. And we actually have divided up the time block in 3 parts. So I'll tell you, in advance what we're going to cover. Number 1 is we're going to cover the federal action. I'm going to cover my cell phone. We're going to cover the federal action in Washington, because that's where U.S. Climate Plan is. That's where Evan works. And the second part, we're going to talk about, what is U.S. Climate Plan? Because it's a very important organization. We have to know how it works. It's really important that we know, not only because it is U.S. Climate Plan, but it's a model that other organizations could follow. We should know about it. And finally, we're going to talk about Hawaii's role, what it can do in energy, so as to be part of the global efforts to slow down climate change.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. Andrew, see if you can make him dance.
Do my best.
It's going to be hard to sit him down, but we'll see.
So, on the last show that you came on, one of the concerning things that you said was there's no current federal level plan, either in energy or in climate. Why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, well, I think it's not for lack of need, certainly. It's something that people have been talking about for a long, long time. What should our goals be? What is our strategy? How do we move forward on energy? Because there are all these pressing energy issues. Traditional environmental damages, things like national security, trade deficit, all these things. Now, climate change has kind of come to the fore as one of the most pressing issues and energy challenges, really. But we haven't really been able to come up with a plan on a federal level. So that's sort of what we're working on, creating a strategy. And this is not something that is common. Lots of other countries that are developed countries have sort of long-term goals, strategies written into law, and benchmarks for getting there.
Do you think this is more of an executive issue that President Obama has roadblocked us in, or is this more of a Congress issue?
Sure.
What's your perspective?
Well, we shouldn't talk about President Obama specifically, because this is something that's been ongoing for many years now, our lack of planning. But certainly, as time goes on, it becomes more and more dire, and it is more pressing that we do move forward. So I would say there's a lot that the executive branch can be doing. President Obama recently put forward a climate action plan in June, which is sort of a collection of things that he can do using executive authority. But we did a little bit of analysis of his climate action plan and sort of showed how it still is insufficient. In a lot of ways, there's more that he can do, but in a lot of ways, in order to get the really big changes that we need to see on an energy level, we do need Congress to act.
Yeah, you were mentioning to me the 2 degrees target. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So the world's governments have agreed internationally to control warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Sort of the scientific basis for that being that if warming occurs more than 2 degrees Celsius, there is a very good chance that climate change will create a world that is unlike what civilization has grown to adapt on and potentially create irreversible changes. So the world's governments have agreed to this 2 degrees Celsius target, and now it's up to the world's governments to figure out how we get there. And so the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, took a look at that 2 degree target, which they agreed upon, and sort of showed how countries need to reduce their emissions levels in order to get there. And so for industrialized countries like the US, we need to reduce our emissions levels 36 to 49% from 2005 levels by 2020.
Got it. So do you think that, where do you think most of these reductions are going to come from? What sectors?
So looking at the 2020 target, in the short term, the biggest potential for emissions reductions is probably in the electricity sector. There's a couple different reasons for that. One is simply that the technology is more advanced in the electricity sector for making the transition to these low carbon technologies. Another reason is that consumers, whether they be residential or commercial, tend to adapt quicker to changes in price changes in price for electricity than they do for things like gasoline. So we see that there's easier substitution that can occur there.
Got it. So are we talking about the average Joe who's unplugging his microwave when he's not using it, or is this more the large companies where this is going to come from?
Sure. There's a lot that we can do as individuals, obviously. I think we all know that. But for any really large-scale change to happen, it's going to have to be systemic. So businesses need to step up, utilities need to step up, and really we need policy changes to get us there.
On a federal level?
I would say yes, although, there's lots of things that can be happening at a state and local level as well.
Right. So you mentioned the 2 degree target and that other nations have adopted policies already. Are they going by this 2%?
2 degree target?
2 degree, right.
For the most part, yes. A lot of other nations, especially industrialized ones, signed on to the Kyoto Protocol,
right,
which sort of bound them to that target.
Right.
And certain emissions reductions that they committed to. The U.S. right now has internationally agreed to reduce its emissions 17% from 2005 levels by 2020, but that's less than half of the minimum of what science says is necessary.
Are we on track? What are we on track for right now?
Sure. Well, we have seen good reductions in CO2 emissions over the past couple of years. A part of that was the economic slowdown in 2008. A part of that has been the move to natural gas and more renewables coming online and less coal. But a lot of that is unknown how big those emissions reductions are going to be, because with the move to natural gas comes more methane emissions, and we're not exactly sure how much we're emitting there, which is a big problem. But as far as being on track, President Obama believes that with his suite of executive actions he's proposed, he can get us to that 17% level by 2020. But there's a lot of uncertainty there, and some analysis that we've done has shown that we could get as little as 8% below 2005 levels, which is actually less than where we are today if certain things don't happen.
Got it. Does that account for the uncertainty in natural gas and other
That's
components?
definitely a part of it. If natural gas is really, really bad, it could be even worse than that.
Got it.
Okay, I got some questions. Call it cross-examination.
All right.
So, so we're not going to go, under this deal, assuming it works, we're not going to go more than 2 degrees a year.
It's not a year. It's the cumulative warming since the since pre-industrial times.
2 degrees over what?
2 degrees Celsius over the average temperature
Back where?
before the industrial revolution.
Okay, ever.
Yes.
We're going to hang in there at 2 degrees max.
Yes. So right now we've seen about 0.8 degrees Celsius of warming.
Okay, so what would that be? I mean, can you convert that to sort of an average global temperature?
Not off the top of my head, but it's not so much the temperature that matters as it is what the impacts of that temperature change are globally. And if we go over that, we could really see catastrophic events occur, like the melting of the East Antarctic ice sheet permanently.
Actually, they got more ice there. Did you hear?
Yes, I did hear that.
Maybe it's reversing. Maybe those southern senators were right. What do you think? They were right?
It's hard to tell. We can't, really say any short-term
And there's more
changes
ice in the
predict.
Arctic too.
Huh?
There's more ice in the Arctic too.
Well,
A little bit. Scotia bit.
Yeah, the Greenland melting has been happening a lot faster than anyone predicted too.
Yeah, yeah.
So, all these things are very uncertain, but
Well, it sounds like it's really, pretty amorphous, because how do you know that the accelerated warming happens at this magic 2 degree thing?
Well,
There's no science to back that, is there?
there is science to back it, but it's all very uncertain. Basically, it's about a risk analysis, and 2 degrees is the politically palpable level of risk that the world's governments have agreed to
The
take
world's
on.
governments agreed to.
Yes.
Is that-
I got a lot of confidence in them.
Yeah.
They're the ones who got us here in the first place.
This is true, yeah, and a lot of very prominent scientists are saying that even 2 degrees is too much. And James Hansen of NASA, for example, recently was the lead author on a paper that suggested that we should actually be aiming for a 1 degree target. The world's governments are having a hard time figuring out how we're going to keep warming
Well, that's
below
true.
2 degrees. If 1 degree is our target, then we may really be in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, this is all very theoretical at the moment, and one of Andrew's questions, and I'll let him carry on with it, is gee, how do you do that? Where do you start? What foot do you put out first?
So, just visually, I think a lot of the viewers have seen those maps where Florida just completely disappears when the
Yeah.
sea levels rise. Is that the 2 degree point, or is that?
No. Yeah, no. It would take a good amount more warming than that, probably around 3 to 5 degrees. But again, the sooner we act, the sooner that we have control over these types of things. So, a lot of viewers, I'm sure, know that even if we stopped emitting all CO2 now, we're still going to see a certain amount of warming, no matter what we do, unless we sequester it quite a deal. So.
Yeah. Well, so, but what happens? I mean, what kind of policy do you change? What kind of affirmative action do you take? What does Congress do? I appoint you Congress, Evan. You are now Congress. Tell me what you would do to achieve the 2%.
Better yet, we make you the executive head.
Everything you want
Yeah.
to be.
Okay, this is exciting.
King
No
for a day.
bureaucratic.
All right.
roadblocks.
Well,
Is this in your plan, by the way?
Yeah, actually, that's point one. Yeah. Wow, so many opportunities. Free puppies for everyone. No, I think there are a lot of things that can be done on so many different levels. I think the biggest, most important thing, and that our analysis and many other people have shown will yield the longest term and greatest emissions reductions, is to put a price on the pollution that is causing all the damage. And that we know will incentivize businesses, consumers, everyone at every level of the economy and all the markets to not only conserve fossil fuel energy, but also switch and substitute to cleaner sources of energy. And depending on how the level that you price that at and the rate of increase that you can get really, really big emissions reductions. So I think that really is the most important thing.
Okay, no surprise here. I mean, it's just a matter of going down that same thing with fossil fuel. I mean, it's real simple. We can talk about the 2% and the end of the world, but the solution is the same as it was before. Don't use fossil fuel. Simple.
Pretty much, yeah. And the pricing mechanism really is the most efficient and least cost method for getting there.
It's a punishment.
It's a punishment, but we can also take that revenue and either return it back to consumers or use it to do a lot of other good things that could accelerate our ability to cope with climate change, and also maybe other things that people view as politically palpable, again, like deficit reduction, things like that.
Okay,
So
Andrew,
essentially what you're saying is that a tax program is better than a cap and trade program? More efficient?
A cap and trade program would work as well. Essentially, they're achieving the same means or end, but through different means. The problem with the cap and trade program, as we've seen it exercised throughout Europe, is that there's a lot of room for political gaming and manipulation, and so many loopholes, and it's not very transparent. A simple price on carbon or whatever kind of greenhouse gas pollution is very visible to consumers and businesses and allows them to better make business plans. And so recently there was actually a New York Times article that showed how I think something like 40 of the world's biggest companies are already incorporating a price on carbon into their long-term financial planning.
Are there any countries that have tried a tax?
Yeah. So there are countries, there are also provinces and states. There are a few provinces in China. One of the most successful has been British Columbia's really relatively modest carbon tax. We also have some of the Nordic countries that have had a carbon tax in place for a long time, and really no fuss about it up there, and it seems to be getting the job done. So
we're going to take a short break, Evan. That's Evan Weber, U.S. Climate Plan in Washington, D.C. He's a founder of that organization. And Andrew Anderson, our longtime think tech person and friend over the years, from the beginning of our studio, I think. This is Think Tech Talks. We're talking community matters. And the title of our show is Evan Weber Comes to Town. Because he's here, not Washington. Just a comment, too, is that when we get back from this break, Evan, I think the question should be, this is a national, by-nation initiative. So the deal is that all the nations who are involved in this deal have to do something. And the question I put to you after we come back is, suppose one of them doesn't. What do we do? Smack him on the side of the head? What do we do? We'll be right back after this break.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
We're back. We're live. We're at Think Tech here on the first business day of the year. And the title of our show is Evan Weber Comes to Town here on Think Tech Talks Community Matters. Evan Weber is with U.S. Climate Plan in Washington, and he's come back home for a little vacation around the holidays. And he's been joined by Andrew Anderson, our co-host. Andrew is a financial advisor, and these guys know each other really well.
Too well.
So the question before the House is, suppose one of the signatory countries to this 2-degree deal decides he's not going to do it, or can't, or is politically locked up and just can't get to it. Some countries are like that. We know that here in the U.S.
Yes, we do. So yeah, it's a great question. It's actually really timely. About a month ago, or a month and a half now, the international climate negotiations in Warsaw, Poland just wrapped up, and we actually saw a couple of countries who had previously signed on to the Kyoto Protocol backtrack on the commitments they had made there. Most notably, we have Canada, Japan. Canada's in a tough spot because they really want to get all that tar sands oil out of Alberta. Well, it's not a tough spot. That's just what they want.
There's a lot of money in it for
There's a
them.
lot of money, yeah. Japan is in a tough spot because of the shutdown at Fukushima and the sort of political and technological backlash from that. And then lastly, we have Australia, who is actually sort of seeing the kinds of politics over climate change that we have previously experienced here in the US. They had a pretty progressive climate policy where they did put a carbon tax in place, and now there's a new prime minister that was elected into office who sort of vowed to repeal the carbon tax and break apart all these really good climate programs that they had going on. And so Warsaw was, for people who want climate action on an international level, Warsaw was kind of a really disappointing conference. Not only did these countries backtrack on their commitments, but they actually backtracked at them publicly in the most important venue for international climate action. And the question sort of is becoming, how do we make these things internationally binding? We have very few internationally binding frameworks. One that's been successful has been the Montreal Protocol, which was for chlorofluorocarbons, which were damaging the ozone, and now it's actually being used to fight climate change with HCFCs, which are a really, really potent greenhouse gas. So that's been really successful and will continue to be. But for something that's a relatively niche thing in our economy, these chlorofluorocarbons, for something that has literally been the backbone of our economy for a century plus, it's much more politically challenging, and it's not clear how this is going to be internationally binding, and that's one reason why people are losing faith in the international process and looking more towards what can we do domestically. On the other hand, it's also something that really worries people who don't like large international agreements and feel like the UN shouldn't dictate national policy. A lot of people in the U.S. feel that way.
What about the IPCC? I mean, it's an international organization. Mm-hmm. It has no teeth whatsoever. Absolutely. It probably has no gums either. But is there a role? I mean, could it be beefed up? Is it the natural, authority, so to speak, as a collaborative authority around the world to have some teeth and make this happen?
So, the IPCC, for viewers who don't know, is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's not really an authoritative body, rather than it is a collection of sort of the world's premier scientists, economists, policymakers around climate change, that it has been commissioned by the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention, which runs these international climate conferences. And they've been commissioned to sort of dictate the best climate science and the best sort of policy solutions in the most conservative way possible.
Isn't it about time we put the scientists in charge of it?
Well, I'm not going to say I want a technocratic society. I think that, democracy is a really great thing, and it's led to a lot of great advances. I think, if anything, we should definitely listen to the science. Science isn't fallible, but it's certainly important. But I think there is a role for the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, but all of its power is given to it by its member countries, and so it only has as much role as we're willing to give it domestically.
It sounds like the United Nations, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a branch of the United Nations,
yeah.
So yeah.
So, Andrew, you had some questions about this.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to make a comment first. You said the people who are interested in international plans. Shouldn't everyone be interested in international plans? This isn't just talking about this little airspace above the U.S. We're talking about global climate change.
Sure.
Freeloaders.
Yeah, well, I would certainly agree with you that everyone should be interested in international plans, especially for this international problem. I think the issue is that a lot of people don't believe in climate change in general, don't think that we should act generally. And a lot of people have a lot of mixed feelings about the United Nations as an entity in and of itself. But you're certainly right that for an international issue, the best way to deal with it would be internationally, but politics gets in the way of everything we like dealing with. So when we're limited in that way, domestic action becomes a really big, important part.
Yeah, it's a tough issue. You can't ask people who are struggling to put food on their plates to fork over a quarter of their income.
Sure, and that was a really big issue in the last negotiations as well. A lot of developed countries who are generally actually more prone to act on climate change than a lot of people think are willing to act, but they also realize that the science says that these developed countries who now are enjoying financial success sort of did so at the cost to them, and a lot of the climate damages that we'll see are sort of us in the developed world's responsibility, even though they're going to be bearing the biggest brunt of it. So the climate conferences took place sort of in the foreshadowing of this big super typhoon in the Philippines, which was a typhoon that was literally unprecedented land speeds, and a lot of people had sort of been saying, this is climate change, the climate has changed, we've never seen a storm like this before. How can we be sitting here and not acting and not saying that developed countries have responsibility?
So what are you doing right now? What's U.S. Climate Plan's role?
Yeah, so we are really trying to push forward the debate about energy strategy, and particularly attuned towards climate change. And basically, we want to see a comprehensive federal energy strategy. Like we mentioned earlier, the U.S. currently doesn't have one. And we think that climate change is one of the most important issues of our time, and that we really need to be paying attention to it when making federal planning. So we're sort of launching in at this very prime political moment where President Obama has agreed to act on climate change, and he's sort of put forward all of these initiatives that he's willing to do. But unfortunately, what our analysis shows is that the actions that he's willing to take aren't enough. And so we're trying to push him and Congress forward towards where the science says is necessary.
Got it. Is that the advocacy work that you have been doing? What specific steps have you been taking towards that?
Yeah, so we came out with this big report in October. So first of all, I should mention that we're a very new organization. We just started in June. And we came out with this report in October that looked at sort of President Obama's climate action plan, which was released in June, and showed its shortcomings, how it's good, but also, more importantly, where we can go further on an administrative and congressional level. From there, we sort of started to build up our media exposure using this report and trying to push forward through the media, continue the discussion, elevate the dialogue. And now we're using that rapport that we've built up a little bit to engage in some advocacy with some partner organizations. And we've got a couple other exciting initiatives planned as well, including a big climate conference in April.
Got it. You mentioned your partners. Who are you partnering with right now, and who are you getting your funding from?
Sure. Well, we're kind of working with any organization that is willing to work with us. Our strength comes in numbers, and since we are a small organization, although we really feel that we're playing a vital role, we don't have a lot of the other resources that other organizations that have been around for longer have. So we've been working a little bit with the National Resources Defense Council. We've gotten some help from the Sierra Club, the Pricing Carbon Initiative, Sustain Us, which is sort of a youth climate organization, as well as a number of others.
Got it. And as far as funding goes?
Yeah, so we originally had some grant funding to do our research, which we wrote the report with.
Federal grant funding?
No, it was actually from my alma mater, Wesleyan University, where I graduated from. They sort of spearheaded the project, and from there, after that funding ran out, we started a crowdfunding campaign, and we're able to successfully raise another round of funding that we're now operating off of. Pushing forward, we're looking at a couple of foundations and other grants. Basically, we can't really get federal funding because the work that we do is inherently political, and yeah. So,
Okay, we're going to take a break. Hold that thought. That's Evan Weber, U.S. Climate Plan out of Washington, D.C. He joins us today in the studio because he's here on vacation in the islands. He's from Hawaii. And Andrew Anderson, our co-host, who's a financial advisor in the West Coast, and who has some very interesting questions for Evan. So anyway, this is Think Tech Talks. I'm talking about community matters, and the title of our show is Evan Weber Comes to Town. And after we come back from this break, I wonder if we could address where U.S. Climate Plan fits in the landscape of environmental organizations, because it's brand new. You guys are what, 3 or 4 people in your organization. Where do you fit? What are some of the other big ones? How does that work? You know, you said before at the outset that there's no plan in the United States of America, our country, which should be the most akamai about all of these things of anywhere, and there's no plan. And you guys came on board 6 months ago. What's been happening before you came on board? What's been happening now? How come we got no plan? Who is out there trying to build a plan with you?
Great.
And is it going to get done, or is this just a little moment in time that goes away? We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Maria Kashem of Think Tech Hawaii, and I want to tell you about our Think Tech talk shows. If you didn't know it, Think Tech streams video and audio for all of its shows live on the internet from 2 to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon, and we replay them all night long on Ustream.tv. Visit ThinkTechHawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links. Raise your awareness on Think Tech. I'm Maria Kashem, and I'll see you there.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell of Think Tech. We have some news for you. In addition to our Think Tech TV show and our Asia in Review show on Olelo 54, as of January 1st, we're adding Community Matters to play also 2 hours a week. Check out thinktechhawaii.com for the specific times of each of these shows. We hope you enjoy all 3. Mahalo, I'm Jay Fidell. We're back, we're live, we're Think Tech Talks Community Matters. Evan Weber comes to town. Evan Weber is here with us. He's part of U.S. Climate Plan, in fact, a founder of that organization, which deals with climate change in the Beltway, and it has existed for 6 months. With him is our co-host, Andrew Anderson, who is a financial advisor, just starting on the West Coast. So the question before the House, I'll let Andrew reframe it. Go ahead.
So we were talking about some of the big players in the environmental movement, and where did they get their funding from?
yeah, that's a great question. So one thing is that these really big green groups, I'm thinking like the Sierra Club, Greenpeace USA and International, 350.org, NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, and the Environmental Defense Fund are a few that come to mind. They have incredibly large donor bases, and so they're really able to capitalize on those. They all have really great name brand recognition, and they get the majority of their funding from there. From group to group, other than the donor funding, small donor funding, it varies considerably. Some groups, like Environmental Defense Fund, do a lot of work with industry, and so they'll get a lot of the funding for the work that they do from these industry groups. A lot of traditional environmentalists will view that as kind of controversial, but their sort of whole operating model is working with the industry to achieve change. Other groups get them from different places, like the League of Conservation Voters, for example, has sort of a C3 educational branch that they can get money from the federal government for, as well as other nonprofit foundations. But they also have their C4 branch that does entirely advocacy and election work, and so they can't get money from the federal government for that. But it really varies considerably group to group, but one of the biggest things is donor bases, and grants are always important as well.
You got it?
Yeah, you know, the problem is, though, as I mentioned before the break, is that we got a really serious problem, you know, and it's too easy to say, oh, the kids will handle it. They're smart kids. They'll figure it out. Next generation.
Hey, what are you saying?
There we go. Right. But I mean, that keeps rolling on down the road. Kicking the can, as they say. And in the meantime, we're not making enough progress to really deal with it. I mean, it was only 5 years ago when the Southern Senate was saying it doesn't exist, and they were beating up on academicians who said it did exist.
Right.
It wasn't too many years ago that was happening.
Well, it's still
and now
happening
we're
to a certain extent.
still happening. Okay. So it seems to me that in a perfect world, you would call up your congressman and say, you got to fix climate change, and he would say, Evan, I'm on it. We're going to work all day and all night, the most important thing in the priority list. But that doesn't happen. You have to advocate.
Sure.
A lot of people have to advocate. And, query is advocacy enough to do this deal if the Congress doesn't really get it. Must be I'm getting so excited. Or the executive branch doesn't have the clout to make the Congress get it. And so I think we're in a, I mean, would you agree that we're a little stuck in this right now? How are we going to get unstuck?
Sure.
I mean, we can't keep, we can't throw them out of office. There's so many reasons to throw them out of office, but we can't just throw them out of office. We have to make them understand. How do you do that? Where are you going to go from here? Is this going to actually make progress next few years?
Sure. Well, I think that, advocacy really is one of the biggest things right now. I think that, like you said, they need to hear our voices, and whether it's getting on the phone and calling up your congressman, or going to a rally, or working for an organization that's working directly with the government, that's how they hear our voices, and everyone has a small role in that, because, like you said, we really do need this systemic change in order to tackle the problem, and these individual actions are important, and they are part of the solution, like turning off your lights when you're not using them, switching light bulbs, driving a more efficient car, but they're not going to achieve the change that we really need. So advocacy, I believe, really is important. Whether it will be enough is something that only time can tell, but advocacy is what has given us almost all of the major environmental wins in our time, and I think that businesses also have a role to play, certainly, but for the large-scale change that we need to happen, I believe that the government has to act.
One of the big problems that I see is the same thing the hospitality industry deals with TripAdvisor. The only people who are going to act out are the ones who feel in an extreme way in one direction or the other. On TripAdvisor, you only get the people who have really good experiences or really bad experiences. The same way, you're only going to hear from people who either really care or really oppose certain issues.
Sure.
What ways are we going to be able to tap into the greater public? Is this through advocacy? Should we be doing certain votes? I can't remember any environmental movement votes.
Ask me about education.
Yeah, education.
Yeah.
I know a lot of our universities are getting more and more liberal. I know throughout my education, probably starting in 3rd grade, I was learning about global warming. But
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that education, forgetting that middle ground, really does have a very important role to play. The more that science is promoted in our schools, the more that people will learn that this is an issue that affects not just the people who care about traditional environmental issues, but all of us. It's going to rechange and reshape our entire economy and societies, and no one will be immune from the effects of climate change. Some people will certainly feel it more than others. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time for 30 graders to grow up and then deal with climate change. We're dealing with the world that we have now, and we're also trying to keep that world that we have now relatively what it looks like. And so for now, the people that do care the most are really the most important. Unfortunately, traditionally, the people that care the most for not having climate change action occur have had the most money behind them, and thus in our society, the biggest political power. I think that dynamic is starting to change a little bit, but it's about getting the bodies and voices out there to make our voices heard.
What do you have? What's your response?
Yes,
Well,
yeah,
you know,
there's
something
as you
brewing.
speak, Evan, I'm thinking of Citizens United, and I'm thinking of large corporate, multinational, global interests who are mostly concerned with the bottom line. In this country, having a much greater effect on political appointments and elections than they did before because
Sure.
of Citizens United, and that's a step in the wrong direction. If you want to bring in, the people, so to speak, and have them participate in this.
Sure.
Hopefully they'd be educated. So I think we have a way to go, and I think what I hear you saying, and this is to me a takeaway, is that we have to change the system in order to deal with climate change. It's not just dealing with climate change, as an ordinary matter. We have to change everything to deal with climate change.
Well, I think, yeah, you're right in a lot of ways. Everything, all of our issues are really interconnected. And I think that a lot of people would agree with you there. I also think that, like I said earlier, climate change is going to change everything. So no matter what issue you care about most, it'll some way be affected by a changed climate, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it's education, whether it's economy, economic growth, jobs, you name it. So I think it's important to think about the co-benefits of these things, whether it be climate action, whether it be elections reform. I think that's always hugely important. That being said, like I said before, time is of the essence, and we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. So while we should be working on election reform, we also need to be encouraging innovations in technology that will help us achieve, low carbon technologies. We also need to be pushing for better climate policy, all of these things.
Man, we got a lot to do. I mean, I don't know how you can take a vacation and come back here and spend the holidays like this.
I know, I'm a horrible human being.
I know why he's here. He chased President Obama here.
You want to talk to him,
Evan lives in
That's right.
Kailua too. Just gonna pound on his door.
It's true, yeah. I tried to get on the golf course with him yesterday, but for some reason they weren't having it. I guess my golf game isn't up to par.
We take our third break here, okay? This is Think Tech Talks, Community Matters with, Evan Weber comes to town. Evan Weber's U.S. Climate Plan in Washington, D.C. And my co-host is Andrew Anderson, a financial planner on the West Coast. We'll be right back after this break to talk about Hawaii and what we have learned today, what we are learning that we can use in making Hawaii a better place as far as climate change is concerned. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Come back, we're live. We're Think Tech Talks, Community Matters with Evan Weber, come to town. Evan Weber is from and a founder of U.S. Climate Plan in Washington, D.C. They deal with climate change. They make suggestions to the White House about climate change. They do. They're in the landscape for sure. And my co-host, Andrew Anderson, financial advisor from the West Coast. Well, actually, both you guys are local boys, but you both found other places.
Always from
elsewhere.
Hawaii.
Right.
Living
Your
on the
heart
West
will always
Coast.
be here.
And we'll both be back too.
So speaking of which, what do we need to do here? Andrew, take it.
So, the title of the show is Evan Weber Comes to Town. Not is in Washington, D.C. What's Hawaii's role? What can we do in Hawaii? Are we keeping up to par with...
Sure. It's a great question. I think Hawaii has a really big role to play. I think this line that we hear repeated again and again here in the islands is that Hawaii is sort of a petri dish for energy innovation. And I think a lot of people want it to be that for a lot of good reasons. We have all of the resources here available to us, and a lot of people really invested in an ethic of environmentalism and things like that. So Hawaii has a big role, and I think a lot of the world is sort of looking at Hawaii and some of the issues that we're facing as we go on our energy advancement. One thing that comes to mind is this issue that we have with solar curtailment from residential PV. I don't think any other states are really dealing with this at quite severely as we are so far. And for us, it seems like a bad thing right now, but in a lot of ways, it's a really good thing. The saturation of solar in the market is so much that the utility is actually having to push back on it, and we're having to figure out how we're going to move forward for it. And I think, especially in places like California, they're looking keenly to see what solutions we come up with. In a lot of ways, Hawaii has been extremely innovative from a policy standpoint. We've had, we have third-party solar financing. We have this barrel tax that goes to fund good energy things. In a lot of ways, there's always more we can do. And the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative is one of the most forward-looking in the country. But we've been saying here in Hawaii that we want to achieve 100% energy independence for how many years? And now we're just looking at 40% clean energy by 2030. There have been solutions around for a time. Again, it's a question of the vested interests and whether we have the political will.
Yeah. Say another big question is, what's HECO's role in all of this?
Sure.
You said that there's been a lot of innovation in Hawaii. Is that innovation on more private sector or public sector?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. Like I said, I think the public sector has been pretty innovative with a lot of the policies that have been put forward. A lot of that has been industry pressure. Some of it has been advocacy pressure. There's also been a lot of innovation that's happened from the private sector. HECO should be included in that. As much as in a lot of ways, they're part of the things that people who want to see more renewable energy come online are fighting against. They've also been leading the charge in some different ways. Whether you agree with everything that they've done on that front is another question. But certainly, if you look at other utilities on the mainland, they are one of the more forward-thinking. That being said, I think that they can certainly be doing more, and they have historically been very conservative about making big changes. I think that they can be doing more in terms of energy efficiency. Decoupling has helped a lot, but they can still be doing more to encourage that. I think that their grid really needs to come into the 21st century. This isn't unique to HECO, but because renewable energy is so big here in Hawaii, it's ever more important that the grid keeps up with the market. Again, I think earlier, Jay, you and I were talking about storage technologies, and I think that one of the ways that we can create more reliability and bring more renewable energy online is if HECO really steps forward with large-scale storage.
Definitely.
On the question of political will, and I guess it exists in both jurisdictions, probably every jurisdiction, really every in the world, to get the right understanding of the threat, the risk, and then to take action with the appropriate speed,
Right.
and spend the money if necessary and all that. So just your thoughts, if you've thought about this, who should be leading the charge? Hawaii is what you call it, a petri dish. So let's call it a laboratory,
Sure.
where a social laboratory as well, a political laboratory, if you will. Who should be leading the charge? We have the governor, we have the utility, which is presumably well steeped in these technical issues. We have the PUC, which has a lot of power. We have the consumer advocate. We have the energy office at the DBED. We have the House and Senate committees. I could go on.
Sure.
There's more. There's trade associations. There's the Energy Policy Forum. Where, in order to develop political will, I think it's fair to say you need a leadership. You need a leader. Maybe one organization or one person. What do you think?
That's a great question, Jay. And I guess I will just start by acknowledging that I think so far, all of those organizations that you listed have been taking some leadership role, and they have been moving forward, especially ones that we haven't traditionally thought of as allies in this fight. The Public Utility Commission comes to mind as really have really changed their stance on things and been more forward-thinking as of recent. But I would say, and maybe this is a cop-out, but I really do believe that it has to come from all levels. I think there's a reason that all of those departments exist, and I think that the governor certainly always has a role to play as being not just a figurehead, but also yielding quite a bit of executive power and directing the legislature forward. But the legislature is the one who ends up writing the budgets and approving them, or the governor approves them. But anyways, so I think that everyone really does have a role to play, and I would add to that list individuals. We have a role to play in our own energy efficiency, energy use, purchasing solar power, purchasing small wind, choosing where we shop, buying local, things like that. But also, more importantly, in pushing all of these so-called governmental leaders forward, because they truly are, and I still believe this holds true, especially in Hawaii, they are accountable to us just as much as any other interests. So yeah, I think that we all have a role to play, and we can all be leaders in some sort of way.
Great answer.
So I'm gonna kind of reverse the question.
Last
question. Okay.
Better be good.
Yeah, no pressure's on now. So my dad has been trying to get PV panels, invest in PV on his ranch on the Big Island for about 3 years, and just about a month ago, he was approved.
Right.
He did have to deal with the homeowners association, but a lot of it was storage issues. Who can we put the blame on?
Well, I think you set that one up pretty well. But I'm guessing it wasn't the solar company because they probably wanted his money. And I'm guessing it wasn't your dad, since I know he's a really great guy and he really wanted those solar panels. I think, as I said earlier, Hawaiian Electric Industries has been forward-thinking in the past, but everything is relative. And I think that right now we're reaching a point where they really do need to be doing a lot more, because there is such huge demand for these products and services, and they traditionally have been in charge of generation. That business model is now changing quite a bit. What they primarily are and should be is an electricity, is a grid, the electrical grid, and it's their responsibility to make sure that the grid is capable of handling the power no matter where it comes from. And I think we're moving to a model where we have more distributed generation, more democratic generation, and if HECO, as the publicly sanctioned utility, is standing in the way of that, then it's their responsibility to make sure that we can move forward.
You worked for HECO,
all right.
didn't you?
We're out of time.
All right.
Okay, we can continue this
Too eager.
conversation. That's Andrew Anderson, my co-host, a financial advisor from the West Coast, who makes his way here at Christmas time. Okay, and Evan Weber, his friend, with a founder of U.S. Climate Plan in the Beltway. We are here on Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We're doing Community Matters, and the title of our show is Evan Weber Comes to Town. We know that for sure now. Thanks for watching. Next time around, Carlos Juarez in a few minutes with Patrick Branco, U.S. Foreign Service in Bogota.
Bogota.
Okay. Aloha.